everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode of The Rope of Hope. I am your host, Kimberly Plesia. I have missed you guys. Oh my gosh. See, this is what happens when I take a week off. I go through withdrawal of my audience. So I have definitely missed you guys. I'm so glad to be back. Tonight, I am joined by Dr. Karen Bryson, and we are going to be discussing traumatic loss and how you move from that space of just surviving to being able to thrive. Before we get into that, you guys, if you want to be a part of this broadcast, if you want to support this broadcast, all I ask is you go to buymeacoffee.com/ this fat girl life. You guys know, that I run off caffeine. That is how I survive in life. That's what makes me thrive. So definitely help keep me caffeinated. Plus, by becoming a follower over there, you guys get the tea first. Anytime something new is happening, any exciting breakthroughs, you find out about it there first. So again, that's buymeacoffee.com/ this fat girl life. Dr. Karen, thank you so much for being with me tonight.
Well, thank you for inviting me on your show. It's great to be here.
So why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am an author, I am a podcaster, and I am a university professor. I have a podcast called The Curious Professor. I have written over 50 books on a variety of topics, both fiction and nonfiction. And I enjoy podcasting. I enjoy being a guest on other people's podcasts and also interviewing people on my podcast. So it's always great to have the opportunity to get to speak with other people who are doing podcasts. So thank you so much for having me here this evening.
Of course, of course. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. I'm going to let you kind of take over and just share your story.
Okay. Well, I'm now a middle-aged woman, but my life was impacted by two traumatic losses. When I was in my mid-20s, my father died by suicide, which was an unexpected loss, and it was very traumatic for my family. And then when I was in my late 20s, I experienced a neonatal death. Which was one of the most difficult things that I ever had to deal with in my life, the loss of a child shortly after he was born. And it really changed the direction of my life. Those two traumatic losses really did impact me and impact my path and the direction of my life. I don't think I would be doing any of the things that I'm doing today had I not experienced those two losses at what I would consider critical points in my life.
So, with losing your father, I mean, at a very young age, I mean, early 20s is very, very young. Had you, I know I've lost my mother, and that was 5 years ago, and I still don't think I've fully processed it. I don't know that you ever fully processed the loss of a parent younger than what you expected to happen. So by the time you get to your late 20s and you've now gone through the loss of a child, have you even dealt with the loss of your father or processed it fully?
Yeah, that's the thing that I think that really did impact the trajectory of my 20s was greatly impacted by that loss, the loss of my dad, because it was a point in my life where I had just graduated college, graduated graduate school. I went on and got a master's degree in mental health counseling, and I was working as a counselor at that time, and it was such an unexpected and sudden thing. I mean, I still remember to this day the feeling that I had. And I knew, like, you can sense that something's not right. And my mom called me and told me that my dad died, and he was 45 at that time. And it was just so unexpected. And it takes you a while to even process, is this real? Is this happening? Because when you're in your 20s, you imagine, as most people do, I'm going to have my dad for all of these life milestones that are going to be happening. He's going to be there when I get married. He's going to be a grandfather when I eventually have children. All of these things that you imagine on a traditional pathway of someone's life, those milestones, that important, significant person is gone. They're just gone out of your life. And it was so unexpected. I was trying to remember the last conversation I had with him was a little bit off, and I couldn't figure out why. And then it made sense to me. I was like, wow. But I wasn't expecting, him to take his life. That was really, really hard. And it brought so the survivors were my mom and my brother. I have a small family, but it brought us, the three of us, closer together. But that's not the way in which you want to become,
Right.
closer to your sibling or closer to your mom by losing your dad. So it was really hard. It was very difficult to process that kind of a loss. Also, that was because I'm old, that was in the 1990s. So we didn't have necessarily the types of support that people do today for those types of losses. It's not like you could just hop on Facebook and get into a support group. The internet barely existed back then, so you had to find ways of connecting with people that were experiencing similar, the similar types of loss and grief. And it wasn't as easy to find those resources. And you would think, because I was working as a counselor at that time, it might have been easier for me to deal with that kind of a loss, but it actually wasn't, because there's an expectation when you're a mental health counselor yourself that, you're somehow going to be able to deal with that easier or better. But that's not necessarily true when it's your own life and your own feelings and your own, your own family.
I think in turn it would actually make it harder, because you do have that preset expectation, and then you also have the fact that you're trying to help others while basically neglecting your own
Right.
feelings and emotions and grief. So that, I would think, would make it even harder. It's one of those things of, they always say, a hairdresser should never cut their own hair.
Right.
A counselor should never counsel themselves.
Right. Exactly. And at that time too, it was not really as talked about in society as it is today. We have more of an openness, which is great in our culture and in our society, to deal with all areas of mental health and being more open and being able to have these more open discussions. That really didn't happen as much or as frequently back then. So you kind of, I hate to use the word suffer in silence, but it was kind of that happening. And I think people today, no one wants to obviously experience that, but if someone is going through that type of unexpected, complicated grief, that there are more resources available that they can perhaps process that more quickly and in a more healthy way.
Oh, I completely agree. I remember the 90s very well. And yeah, back then there weren't nearly as many readily available resources.
Yes.
I'm not going to say there weren't as many resources, but they were not as readily available.
Yes.
So you've gone through this traumatic loss of your father. You're trying to process that. You're basically suffering in silence, like you said. And then you hit this milestone that you fully expected him to be there.
Yeah.
And he wasn't. And so then it's like reopening a can of worms. It's reopening that grief and ripping that Band-Aid off and ripping off that scab all over again.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if you've had any experience with losing a child, but when you have that experience of, you go through a pregnancy and you have all these expectations of what your life is going to be when you become a mother or a parent, and that's not there anymore. There's nothing. You lose your, in my case, my baby died after just living one day. And it was so heart-wrenching to leave the hospital and be around all these other women that are carrying babies, and I'm empty-handed. And it was such a overwhelming sense of pain and grief that I don't even know how I survived that. And plus, it really was very difficult to the person who I was married to at that time. It really was a catalyst for us um, separating.
I've never gone through a neonatal loss to that point. I dealt with multiple miscarriages, but you kind of go through the motions afterwards. There's no real method to your madness or anything. You're just doing what you have to do to make it through that day, and it is going through the motions, so to speak,
Yeah.
because you're not even functioning at that point.
Yeah, and there's an expectation. Like you have this idea that your life is going to be a certain way, that certain things are going to happen at certain times, like you're going to get married, you're going to have kids, you're going to raise your children in the suburbs, and all these things that we have in our culture kind of idealize that, a traditional life is supposed to be this way. And then when you realize, wow, my life is not going to be this way at all. I'm not going to have the opportunity to be a parent. I'm not going to have the opportunity to, raise children or do those traditional types of, to take on those traditional female roles. So then what gives my life meaning?
Well, and when you're dealing with that, when you've gone through an entire pregnancy, that becomes part of your identity.
Yeah.
You take that on without even realizing you've done it. You know, and we do that in our lives, regardless of whether it be from a marriage, from a job, from pregnancy. You take part of that on as your identity. And then to have that ripped away, you are left kind of floundering
Yeah.
and not knowing where that balance is. Where are you in that limbo?
Right. Exactly.
So you've gone through these losses, and then at that point, your marriage is suffering because of it, and you're going through the motions. How do you even begin to pick up pieces from that?
My life really changed a lot because after the death of my child, then I went through a divorce, which that wasn't, easy either. Then I was in my early 30s, and being a person who's divorced, uh, realizing I'm probably not going to have an opportunity to be a parent. Then what shape does my life take? And that's when I made the decision. I said, well, I I'm not sure I like what's happening right now with my life, because I had molded, what I was doing in my career and what my expectations were around these certain things that I thought were going to happen. And I was like, well, if this doesn't happen, then what? So I decided to pursue getting a doctorate and, earning my PhD. And then eventually my goal was to become a university professor, which is exactly what I did. And I decided, okay, if I'm not going to raise a child, what is the way I'm going to be, mentoring or giving back to the next generation? And I can do that as a university professor.
So for you, being that professor kind of took over that role that you had in your mind of motherhood.
Yeah, in a way, I guess. And I also give birth to lots of books.
There
That
you
happens,
go. So
that happens a
you're still a
lot.
mother. So now you're surviving. You're making it through. How do you get to that point of thriving?
I think you need to have a mindset of, if my life isn't going to be how I expected it to be, or how society tells women it's supposed to be, then what can I do that is going to be beneficial to humanity? What can I do as a way to serve if I'm not going to take a role of parenting the next generation, or doing these other things? And what will be my role? How can I serve others? And I think when we look outward rather than, I think a lot of times when people become depressed, it's because they're looking inward rather than looking outward. So if I'm looking outward and saying, how can I be of service to others? How can I be of service to humanity? What are those ways? What are the gifts that I have, that I've been given, that I can utilize? So for me, those things are being a counselor, being an educator, being a mentor, writing. Those have been themes throughout my life of things that I feel that I have to contribute to the world. Well, what are the best ways that I can do that given these circumstances? And then just pursuing those things to the fullest. How can my life be full? Instead of, I hate to be cliche, but the glass half empty, the glass half full.
Mm-hmm.
I could have spent the rest of my life, which I wallowed in pity for quite a while. And, it was like, why am I not able to do all these things that, all the other women who I know, are having kids and raising kids and doing all these things, but I can't. I could have looked at that and said that glass half empty, but instead I said, well, where's my glass full? What are those things that I'm doing that are great and exciting, and put my energy and my focus into those things? So it's like a shift of not what don't I get to do? What don't I have? What are these wonderful things that I have, and what do I get to do? And what experiences are my life going to bring forward? And those are the things that I'm doing full on. Yeah, I want to write. I want to, teach people and mentor and guide and counsel.
So now you're doing all these wonderful things that, had things been different, you might not have had the opportunity to do.
Exactly. Yeah. When I was thinking about this interview, I really did some self-reflection. I thought, it is true, exactly what you said, that my life would have been completely different. I would not have probably achieved a lot of the things that I've achieved that I feel very proud of. Being a best-selling author of over 50 books, there's no way I could have written 50 books, I don't think. Being a mom, I don't know, but I'm just guessing, that
I'll be
probably wouldn't have
honest,
happened.
I am a grandmother. It's just my husband and I and our pets in the home. And I have this ideal that I would love to write a book. But I'm like, I already work a full time job. I'm running my own business. When am I going to have time to write a book?
Right.
So, yeah, I'm just trying to find the time to write one for me is difficult. You have 50.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like, where are you going to put your energy? Where are you going to put your focus? What things can you contribute, and what can you get excited about? What can you be passionate about? If it isn't going to be having kids and raising kids, which a lot of people, that for a lot of people, especially women, that's like the thing. If you ask them, what's the greatest accomplishment that you've had in your life, a lot of women who have raised kids will say, oh, my kids, that's like the first thing that comes to their mind. But if that's not, the circumstances of your life, if you aren't a person who raised kids, then what's that thing? What are those great things that you've achieved and you've accomplished and you've contributed?
Okay, so what is your biggest accomplishment?
Oh my gosh. I have so many things that I'm proud of, but right now, my podcast, for a lot of reasons, I feel like that was huge for me because, first of all, I'm an introvert. Like, really, I'm extremely introverted. So, just the idea, like, I don't know why. Well, I love listening to podcasts and I have for a long time, but I thought, I had an idea that I wanted to be a podcaster, but for me, being extremely introverted, um, awkward and uncomfortable, generally uncomfortable, about these types of things, especially like a live interview like this, would have been unheard of for me probably 18 months ago. Before I really started getting into podcasting, doing something like this, I would have never in a million years thought that I could ever do something like this. So getting the courage and overcoming my own fears and anxieties and gaining the confidence to be able to do something like this in such a public way, and having my own show, and then being a guest on other people's shows, especially a live show. So for someone like me, that's just overcoming a lot of insecurities and really challenging myself to get out of my comfort zone, which is what I always try to tell my students. The way that you succeed in life is to really get out there outside of your comfort zone and do those things that make you uncomfortable so that you grow, right? That's the way that you grow, by challenging yourself. So it's easier for me to tell other people to do that than for me to do it. So yeah, this was my biggest thing most recently. Being a podcaster took a tremendous amount of courage and really getting outside of my comfort zone, especially now because yes, I've been a professor for years, but it's different. It's different standing in front of a classroom and teaching where you're considered the expert than it is doing something like this in a public forum. It's a lot scarier. It's more intimidating.
Yeah, it is. I will completely agree. I'm one of those people that I've spent my entire life doing public speaking. I did public speaking competitions when I was in school. But every time I launch a new podcast, I am always so nervous. Those first couple episodes, I was like, I don't get why I'm so nervous about this. I do this every day, but it's different. It's on a different level.
Yeah,
So I
it
get
definitely
it.
is. Yeah, it definitely is. But every time you do something new and challenge yourself, it does take a lot of courage. So I applaud people who, I mean, for me now, putting out a book is great. I love every time I do put out a book, but putting out that first book is really scary. Like, and I remember how it feels. Is a very similar thing when you do a podcast for the first time. It's like, whoa, this is, and it may be even scarier because you can hide behind a book. All anyone sees is your picture and, your name. This is you. If you're, especially in a video, this is you. There's no hiding. There's no hiding behind the pages of a book. There's
Exactly. Well, Dr. Karen, I want to thank you so much for coming on, for being so open and vulnerable, and for sharing so much. I think that your story definitely resonates with a lot of people, and people are definitely going to get something from it. I do have one final question for you, and I ask this of every guest on every episode of this show. What is the most inspirational thing that's ever been said to you?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. The most inspirational thing that ever has been said to me. Hmm. Um, I think it's, you only have this life. Like, you better live it and live it well. And you never know when your time's going to come. I think that, and especially as we approach middle age, well, I'm in middle age.
I'm there.
um, it's really a wake-up call because your time does become more limited, and you better do those things you want to do and do them now. Don't hesitate, and don't um, allow yourself to be afraid. Do the things that you want to do and do them while you can.
I absolutely love that. Well, again, I want to thank you so much for coming on here and having this discussion. You guys, I will be back next week. I've got some bonus episodes coming up next week. And if you follow any of my other podcasts, you already know that later on this evening is the premiere episode, the launch of my newest podcast, My Fat Perspective. So definitely tune into my pages, That's where you're going to find me. I hope you all have an amazing night.
Thank you
Bye,
so
everybody.
much. Thanks.
Of course.